It was a quiet Friday night in one of Manhattan's most exclusive restaurants, the kind of place where power dressed itself in silence. Expensive suits, diamond necklaces, and whispered conversations filled the air. No one expected drama here, especially not from the man sitting at the corner table near the window. That man was Richard Halden, a billionaire tech CEO, famous for his charm in interviews and his ruthless business tactics behind closed doors. Tonight, he wasn't giving orders to a boardroom. He was sitting across from his pregnant wife, Emily, who looked like she hadn't slept in days. Her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted her napkin, eyes fixed on the tablecloth instead of her husband's face. At first, their conversation seemed ordinary, quiet, controlled. But beneath the surface, tension was boiling. Richard leaned closer, his voice low and sharp. "You embarrass me again today," he muttered. Emily shook her head. "I didn't mean don't talk back," he snapped, loud enough for the next table to hear. A few diners glanced up, then quickly looked away. This was Manhattan. People minded their own business. But something about Emily's expression, the fear in her eyes, made it hard to ignore. She whispered, "Please, not here." He slammed his hand on the table. Silverware rattled. "You think because you're pregnant, you can talk to me like that?" The room froze. Waiters stopped mid-step. A woman at the bar gasped softly, but no one said a word. Everyone recognized him, the billionaire CEO who donated millions to charities, who smiled on magazine covers. The kind of man people didn't cross. Emily's eyes glistened with tears. She placed a hand over her stomach as if to protect her unborn child. A waiter took a hesitant step forward, then stopped when he saw the bodyguard's glare from across the room. The sound of Richard's voice echoed again. "You'll regret this when we get home." Silence, uneasy, heavy. People watched, but no one dared to move. And then from a nearby table a woman slowly stood up, eyes blazing with determination. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez had just decided this night wasn't going to end in silence. The restaurant was no longer just a place to eat, it had turned into a silent stage. Every eye watched, every breath was held, but no one dared to speak. The sound of a violin playing in the background felt awkwardly out of place, its calm melody clashing with the storm brewing at Richard Halden's table. Emily sat frozen, her hands still over her stomach. She whispered something softly, maybe an apology, maybe a plea, but Richard's voice cut through hers like a knife. "Do you ever think before you open your mouth?" he hissed. Her lip trembled. "I'm sorry, I just enough." A sharp thud followed, not a punch, not yet, but his fist slamming against the table so hard the glasses shook. Water spilled, dripping onto the white tablecloth. A few diners shifted uncomfortably in their seats. A middle-aged man in a suit leaned toward his wife. "We should do something," he murmured. She shook her head immediately. "Don't. That man could ruin your career with one phone call." That's how it always went. Power made cowards of decent people. A waiter, no older than 20, hesitated near the bar. His hands were shaking as he whispered to the manager, "Sir, should we call the police?" The manager's voice was low and firm. "Do not get involved. That man spends $500,000 here every year. You want to lose your job?" The waiter looked down, ashamed, as he tucked his order pad into his apron. Richard leaned closer to Emily again, his words quiet but venomous. "You'll learn your place, even if I have to teach it to you." Emily's eyes welled up, but she didn't speak. Across the room, phones began to appear discreetly. Someone pressed record. Another person whispered, "He's the CEO of Halden Systems, right? The billionaire?" "Yeah." Someone else replied, "Man's got enough money to buy this place 10 times. But even billionaires can't buy silence forever." The sound of a chair scraping across the floor broke the tension for a second. A woman near the entrance stood up as if she might go over. Her husband tugged her arm. "Please don't. It's not our fight." She sat back down, shaking her head in disbelief. Emily tried to hide her tears, brushing them away with trembling fingers. She reached for her handbag, whispering, "Can we just go home?" Richard's eyes narrowed. "Sit down." When she didn't move fast enough, he grabbed her wrist, not gently. The table shook again. Her face twisted in pain. "Richard, please. You're hurting me." That was when the murmur began, people whispering to each other, phones now openly recording. The billionaire didn't care. He was too angry, too confident that no one would stop him. He pointed toward a waiter who stood frozen. "You, stop staring and get me another drink." The young man swallowed hard and obeyed. The air was thick, suffocating. Every second felt longer than the last. Emily's eyes darted around the room, maybe searching for a friendly face, a savior, anyone brave enough to help. But all she saw were bowed heads and glowing phone screens. Richard smirked. See? Nobody's going to help you. They never do. He leaned back, proud, cruel. At that moment, one voice broke through the silence, a calm, firm voice that didn't belong to a waiter, a diner, or a security guard. It came from behind him. That's enough. Heads turned instantly. Standing a few tables away, wearing a simple navy jacket and calm composure, was Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Richard glanced over his shoulder, irritated. Excuse me? Aok didn't back down. You heard me. That's enough. The restaurant manager rushed forward, panic on his face. Ma'am, please, don't get involved. This isn't your concern. Aok looked at him sharply. When a man abuses a woman in front of witnesses, in front of her unborn child, it is everyone's concern. The room went dead quiet. Even the violinist stopped playing. Richard chuckled a low, arrogant laugh. Oh, this is Rich, the congresswoman herself. You think you can tell me what to do? Aok took a step closer, unafraid. No, she said, but the law can. Her words cut through the tension like a blade. Cameras turned toward her now. People whispered. Is that really her? Aok? Yes, it's her. She's actually standing up to him. Richard's expression darkened. You're making a big mistake. Aok replied quietly. The mistake is thinking your money makes you untouchable. The crowd began to stir, courage spreading like wildfire through the room. People who had been silent moments ago now lifted their phones higher. The billionaire turned red, slamming his chair back. You don't know who you're talking to. Aok stood tall, calm as ever. No, she said. I know exactly who I am talking to, a bully who finally met someone who wanted to look away. If you saw something like this happening, would you record it, walk away, or step in? Drop your answer in the comments, and tell us which city and country you're watching from. Let us see how far courage can travel. For a moment, the entire restaurant forgot how to breathe. Every pair of eyes was fixed on the woman now standing in front of one of the most powerful men in America. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Her calm stare alone was louder than any shout. Richard Halden leaned back in his chair, amusement spreading across his face. Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez, he said slowly, his tone dripping with mock respect. This is a private matter. I suggest you stay out of it. Aok crossed her arms. Private? She repeated. You're assaulting your wife in front of 24 witnesses and you think this is private? The billionaire's smirk faltered slightly, but his pride wouldn't let him stop. He motioned to his bodyguard. Remove her. The massive man in a black suit took a step forward, but before he could say a word, Aok raised her hand. Touch me, she said quietly, and I'll make sure your boss explains that assault charge personally to the nipped. Gasps echoed around the room. Cameras zoomed in. The bodyguard froze. Emily, still seated, eyes wide, whispered, please, just let it go. Aok turned to her gently. You don't have to be afraid anymore. Not tonight. Those words hit harder than any punch. Emily's lips trembled. She nodded, barely able to speak. Richard's voice grew louder. You think a politician can tell me what to do? You have no idea who you're dealing with. Aok took a slow step closer, every move deliberate, every breath controlled. I know exactly who I'm dealing with, she said. A man who's used to buying silence, but not this time. The restaurant felt like a courtroom now, and she was the only one brave enough to prosecute. Richard slammed his palm on the table again, silverware clattering. You don't understand, lady. She's my wife. This is between us. Aok didn't flinch. That's what every abuser says, she replied. And it's always between us until someone ends up hurt, or worse. A long pause. The entire place was still. Even the air conditioning seemed to have stopped humming. Richard looked around, realizing everyone was filming him. You're all enjoying this, huh? He barked. You think you can ruin me with a few videos? Someone from the crowd called out. No one's ruining you, you did that yourself. Laughter, quiet, nervous, rippled through the restaurant. Richard's arrogance was cracking. For the first time, his voice wavered. He turned toward Emily. Tell them it's fine, he ordered. Emily looked up, tears streaming down her face. It's not fine, she whispered. That sentence, simple, trembling, broke the last thread of his control. He lunged forward, his hand gripping the edge of the table, but before he could do anything more, Aok's voice rang out again, sharp and commanding. Sit down. The authority in her tone was electric. Even the bodyguard hesitated. Richard froze mid-motion. This ends now. Aok continued. You've humiliated her, frightened her, and used your power to make everyone else afraid to stop you. But your power doesn't scare me. Her voice didn't tremble. It carried the kind of conviction that fills rallies and courtrooms, the kind that forces people to act. The manager, who had been silent the whole time, finally found his courage. Ma'am, he said to Aok softly, should I call the police? She turned to him. Yes, do it. A murmur spread through the room. Someone whispered, she actually said it. Another replied, that's Aok, she doesn't back down. The billionaire tried to laugh it off. You're making a mistake. You'll regret this. Aok tilted her head slightly. Maybe, but if standing up for a woman who's being abused is a mistake, I'll make it again tomorrow. That line hit like a hammer. The crowd erupted in quiet applause, hesitant at first, then stronger. Even a few staff members joined in. Richard's confidence completely dissolved. He looked around, realizing no one was on his side anymore. Emily reached for her purse again. This time, she stood up. Her hands were shaking, but she stood tall beside Aok. Richard muttered, sit down, Emily. She looked him straight in the eye for the first time all night. No, the word was soft, but it carried the weight of freedom. If you were sitting in that restaurant, what would you have done? Filmed, stayed silent, or stood up like Aok? Type your answer in the comments and tell us your city and country. Let's see how many people around the world still believe in courage. For a few seconds, the world stood still. Emily was standing now, shaking, terrified, but no longer silent. The restaurant lights seemed brighter, the silence heavier. All eyes flicked between her and the furious billionaire, whose face had turned red with rage and humiliation. Richard Halden rose from his chair, his movements sharp and jerky, the fake charm gone. You think you can walk away from me? He hissed. After everything I've done for you? Aok stepped slightly between them, her posture firm but calm. She doesn't owe you gratitude, she said. No one owes you obedience just because you have money. The billionaire's voice cracked with anger. You don't know who you're talking to. Aok met his glare evenly. A man who's terrified that his power doesn't mean anything right now. Her words hit him like a slap. He clenched his fists, looking like he wanted to shout, but all around him were phones, cameras, witnesses. Every single movement was being recorded. The young waiter who had hesitated earlier now stepped forward quietly and said, Sir, I've called the police. The entire restaurant gasped. Richard spun toward him. You did what? The waiter swallowed hard but stood his ground. They're on their way. For a long moment, Richard stared at the boy, pure fury in his eyes. Then, in disbelief, he looked around and realized that everyone in that elegant room was against him. Even the staff he'd once tipped thousands of dollars were standing with the congresswoman and his wife. You're all making a huge mistake, he barked. I could destroy every one of you. Aok's voice cut in, steady and cold. You already did that the moment you raised your hand to her. That line drew an audible reaction. A few people gasped, a few nodded. Emily was crying quietly now, but she was standing taller. For the first time, her shoulders weren't hunched. She wiped her eyes and said, voice trembling but firm, I'm not afraid of you anymore. The room went dead silent. Aok placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. You're safe now, she said softly. That small act, a hand on a shoulder, felt monumental. It was the visual proof of everything this moment stood for. Suddenly, Richard's arrogance shattered. He pointed a shaking finger at Aok. You think you're saving her? You're ruining her life. You'll see what happens when you go up against me. Aok turned her head slightly, her tone unwavering. What happens? She asked. Another man with power learns that it doesn't make him invincible? The crowd murmured. Some people even clapped quietly. The tide had turned. The manager, who had been petrified minutes ago, now stepped closer too. Ma'am, he said to Aok respectfully, the police said they'll be here in 5 minutes. She nodded. Good. Tell them to bring medical support just in case. Richard looked stunned. For the first time, the control he'd carried his whole life was slipping through his fingers. He turned to Emily again, desperate. You can't do this to me, Emily. You know what this will look like. Emily's eyes red, but strong, met his. Yes, she whispered. The truth. He blinked, speechless. Aok straightened her jacket and looked around the room. I know this isn't easy, she said to the crowd. But silence is how men like this keep power. You see something like this, you say something. You do something. Don't wait for someone else to act. Her words struck everyone like lightning. A woman near the bar nodded through tears. A man who had been frozen earlier said quietly, She's right. Even the violinist who had stopped playing when the fight began slowly lifted her bow and placed it down, whispering. Finally, someone said it. Richard, now completely cornered, slammed his hand on the table one last time. "You're all pathetic," he shouted. "You'll regret this." But no one looked away this time. No one flinched, because now, the crowd wasn't afraid of him anymore. He turned toward Aok, his voice trembling with fury. "You just ended your career." Aok smiled faintly. "If my career ends because I defended a woman's life, then it's a career worth ending." Applause erupted loud and defiant. The sound filled every corner of the restaurant. For the first time that night, Richard realized something horrifying. His money couldn't buy him silence anymore. Aok stepped aside slightly as Emily took one last look at her husband. She didn't say another word, she just turned and walked toward the door. Aok followed, steady and protective. Outside, sirens wailed faintly in the distance, growing closer every second. If you believe standing up for what's right is worth more than money or power, type stand up in the comments. Tell us your city and country. Let's see how far courage can travel tonight. The sound of police sirens grew louder outside the restaurant, bouncing off the tall Manhattan buildings. The once elegant dining room now felt like a stage, every eye fixed on the billionaire whose empire was crumbling in real time. Richard Halden's voice, once full of command, had turned into frantic murmurs. "Emily, tell them it's not true," he pleaded, his tone switching from anger to desperation. "You know how the media works, they'll twist everything." Emily didn't answer. She just stood near Aok, her hand resting over her stomach. She looked exhausted, but for the first time, she looked free. The front doors opened. 2 uniformed police officers entered, followed by a female officer with a calm but firm expression. Cameras flashed from outside. Paparazzi and bystanders had gathered after hearing the commotion. One of the officers spoke clearly. "We received a report of a domestic disturbance involving Mr. Richard Halden." Richard straightened up, forcing a smirk. "Officers? This is ridiculous. I'm Richard Halden, CEO of Halden Technologies. This woman is my wife. We just had a little disagreement." The female officer didn't blink. "Sir, we'll need to hear her side." Emily's voice trembled at first, but Aok gave her a reassuring nod. She inhaled deeply and said, "He's been hurting me for months. Tonight, he tried to hit me in public." The entire restaurant gasped. Even people outside pressed closer to the windows. The officer looked at the bruises faintly visible on Emily's wrist and quietly nodded. "Ma'am, would you like to file a statement?" "Yes," Emily said, her voice stronger now. Richard took a step forward. "You can't do this to me. I'll have your badges," he shouted. Aok moved slightly between them again, her tone calm but powerful. "You can threaten people all you want, but your money doesn't mean anything right now. Not here. Not tonight." The officer turned to him. "Sir, step back." But Richard didn't. His anger exploded one last time. "Do you have any idea who I am? I own this city." The restaurant fell into dead silence. Then Aok spoke, her voice echoing across the room. "No, you rent it from the people who actually live here." The line hit like thunder. Phones everywhere caught the moment. Within hours, that clip would go viral, millions watching, replaying, sharing. Outside, the flashing lights turned the windows blue and red. The officers stepped forward and gently guided Richard's arms behind his back. His expensive watch glinted under the lights as the cuffs clicked shut. He twisted, protesting, but his voice broke under the weight of humiliation. "This isn't over. I'll destroy you all." Aok's gaze was steady. "It's over," she said. "You just don't realize it yet." The crowd began to clap, slowly at first, then louder, a wave of applause that filled the room. Waiters, diners, strangers all cheering, not for fame or politics, but for justice finally seen. Emily broke down crying, and Aok immediately held her, whispering, "You did the hardest thing anyone can do. You told the truth." A reporter outside shouted, "Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez, what made you get involved?" Without letting go of Emily, Aok looked directly into the cameras. Her voice was steady, heartfelt, because silence is what allows abuse to survive. "We cannot keep walking past injustice just because it's uncomfortable. Power doesn't protect you from accountability, it never should." The reporters scribbled furiously. Cameras flashed. Aok continued, "Every woman deserves to feel safe, whether she is married to a billionaire or working 2 jobs to feed her kids. If you see something wrong, don't look away. Say something. Step in. Do something." The applause outside grew louder. Some people were crying. Others just stood in awe. Richard was being led out now, his designer suit rumpled, his arrogance gone. For the first time, he looked small. Aok turned to the officers. Please make sure she gets protection tonight. She shouldn't go home with him or be alone. The female officer nodded. We'll take care of her. As Emily was escorted to the ambulance, she turned to Aok one last time. Thank you, she whispered. You didn't even know me. Aok smiled softly. I didn't have to. You deserve to be safe, that's all that matters. The door shut behind them. The sirens faded into the night. Inside, the crowd was still buzzing, but it wasn't about gossip anymore. It was about courage. One young woman at the bar turned to her friend and said, "Can you believe that?" She stood up to him. Her friend nodded. Maybe now people will stop being scared to speak. Aok adjusted her coat, glanced once more at the now silent restaurant, and quietly said to herself, one story at a time. Would you have spoken up if you were there? Be honest, tell us what city and country you're watching from, and if you believe silence helps abusers win, type enough in the comments. By morning, the footage was everywhere. On Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, millions of people around the world were watching the same 30-second clip. Aok standing between a billionaire and his pregnant wife, her voice echoing, "You rent this city from the people who actually live here." It wasn't just a video, it was a moment that shook the internet. News anchors replayed it on loop. Headlines screamed across screens. Aok steps in to stop billionaire abuse, crowd cheers justice. Power doesn't mean protection. Viral video sparks global outrage. Within hours, hashtags trended in more than 40 countries. Hashtag stand with Emily. Hashtag justice over power. Hashtag OC for the people. Clips spread on TikTok, where users stitched the moment, adding captions like, "This is what real leadership looks like. Money can buy silence until someone decides to speak." People who had never heard of Emily Halden were now sending messages of love and support. One woman in the Philippines commented, "I watched this with tears in my eyes. Thank you for standing up for all of us." A teacher in South Africa wrote, "This is not just about one woman. It's about every person afraid to speak up." Meanwhile, Richard Halden's empire began to collapse. By noon, the stock value of Halden Technologies dropped 28%. His board of directors issued a statement, "We are deeply disturbed by the allegations against our CEO and have suspended him pending investigation." His PR team tried to contain the fire, releasing a bland apology that read, "Mr. Halden regrets any misunderstanding." But it was too late. The world had already made its judgment. Emily, meanwhile, was resting in a private hospital, guarded by 2 police officers. She hadn't looked at her phone, but her name was on every trending list in the world. The same woman who had once been invisible was now a global symbol of courage. Aok visited her quietly, without cameras or reporters. She brought flowers not for show, but for peace. Emily smiled faintly when she saw her. "I still can't believe you did that," she said softly. Aok shook her head. "You're the one who did something brave." "I just refused to walk away." Emily looked down, tears forming. "You don't understand. He made me believe I was nothing without him." Aok placed a hand over hers. "Abusers always say that, but the truth is they're nothing without control. You took that back." For the first time, Emily smiled, a real one. Outside the hospital, crowds had gathered, women holding signs that read, "We believe Emily. Silence is not strength, and power has limits." Reporters shouted questions as Aok left the building, but she simply said, "The story isn't about me. It is about every person who has been told to stay quiet and finally decided not to." The video of that statement went viral again, pulling another wave of support. Meanwhile, investigations into Richard Halden uncovered what many had long suspected, a long trail of NDAs, intimidation, and abuse buried under his company's glossy image. Former assistants, employees, even business partners began speaking out. The man who once owned skyscrapers now faced a criminal trial. The contrast was poetic. A man who built his fortune by silencing others had finally been undone by one woman refusing to be silent and another refusing to look away. TV anchors debated Aok's actions. Some praised her courage, others called it reckless intervention. But the public had already chosen its side. In one viral post, a woman from Brazil wrote, "If Aok hadn't stepped in, the world would never have seen the truth." Sometimes it only takes one person to break the chain. At a press conference days later, Aok addressed the nation. "We have laws that punish crimes but not the culture that hides them. This isn't just about one dinner or one couple. It's about the fear that keeps people quiet when they see something wrong. And if that's what I broke, then I'm proud of it. The audience erupted in applause. Even some of her critics admitted she had done something rare in politics. She acted before calculating. Meanwhile, Emily began to heal. She started counseling, found strength in letters from strangers, and publicly thanked everyone who stood by her. Her final words in an interview touched millions. I thought I was alone, but the night she stood up for me, I realized I wasn't invisible anymore. Have you ever seen someone step up for a stranger? Tell your story below your country, your city, and if you believe silence feeds injustice, type courage in the comments. A week later, the world had changed. The video of that Manhattan confrontation had crossed 200 million views across all platforms. Late-night hosts replayed the clip, journalists called it a defining moment for accountability, and schools began using it in discussions about courage and moral responsibility. Richard Halden, once a symbol of untouchable power, now sat behind bars in a gray suit. No cameras, no applause, just silence. His empire had crumbled overnight. Investors pulled out, companies cut ties, and the board officially removed him as CEO. But the story wasn't about his fall anymore. It was about what his fall represented. Emily's recovery became the heart of that story. In a televised interview 2 weeks later, she appeared calm, hopeful, radiant. Sitting beside her was Aok, not as a politician this time, but as a friend. The interviewer asked, Emily, when you look back on that night, what goes through your mind? Emily took a deep breath. I used to think strength meant staying silent, keeping things together no matter what. But that night showed me that real strength is allowing yourself to be seen, even when it hurts. The interviewer turned to Aok. And what gave you the courage to step in? Aok smiled faintly. The simple truth, if I didn't, no one else would. We all wait for heroes, but sometimes, we're the ones meant to be that person. Those words struck something deep across the world. Clips of the interview flooded social media again. People began sharing their own stories of abuse, courage, and standing up for strangers. A single act of bravery had started a global movement. Nonprofits used the moment to launch new campaigns protecting women's rights and domestic violence survivors. In the Philippines, a mural appeared showing Aok standing beside Emily, painted with the words, "Courage is contagious, even world leaders wait in." A European prime minister tweeted, "Leadership isn't titles or wealth, it's the choice to act when others stay quiet." Meanwhile, Emily began working with organizations to help other women rebuild their lives. Her first public project was a foundation named the Halden Hope Initiative, aimed at giving legal and emotional support to survivors of abuse. When reporters asked why she chose that name, she said, "Because I refuse to let my last name be a reminder of fear." Now, it stands for hope. Her words earned a standing ovation across the internet. Months later, when the trial concluded, the verdict was clear. Richard Halden was sentenced to prison for multiple counts of assault and coercion. For the first time, Emily attended court not as a victim but as a voice. As cameras flashed outside, Aok stood nearby, quietly watching. When asked for comment, she simply said, "Justice doesn't erase pain, but it proves that silence can be broken." That clip became the closing note in thousands of news stories around the world. The night ended with a sense of peace, the kind that only comes when truth finally wins. And as the world scrolled through their screens, one line echoed in the captions of millions of posts: if one woman can speak and one person can stand, then maybe, just maybe, we can all change something. If you believe courage can change the world, type hope in the comments. And subscribe for more stories that prove silence is never strength.